Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. And in this video, you clicked on it, you know it's a list, and you know I'm going to be listing out my 10 favorite Wu-Tang Clan solo efforts, what I think are the 10 best solo albums from various members in the large and legendary New York hardcore hip-hop outfit. Basically, members of the group splitting off and doing their own thing on a record. There are many, many, many Wu-Tang solo albums to sift through, and again, these are the ones, no particular order, that I thought rose to the top, cream of the crop. Before we get this video started, I want to shout out our sponsor, the good people over at Ridge Wallet. They make these nice, nifty, neat, minimalist wallets with metal plates on the sides, held together by a strap. You sort of pop your cards in there. I've been rocking mine for a few months now, enjoying the hell out of it. You can grab your own down there in the description box with the link. Use promo code Fantano to get 10% off. Thank you very much. Let's get into it. All right, first one that I want to mention over here, and I'm going to kind of group the albums together as according to artist. So there are at least a few albums from some members in the group, and unfortunately there are some members of the Wu-Tang Clan who unfortunately I think have never really kind of dropped a solo classic. You know, sorry, you God, I apologize, but you know, it just kind of is what it is. It's nothing personal. But let's get into the first one over here. Ghostface Killah's Supreme Clientele. Not super early in Ghost's solo career, but certainly a standout for me in that I feel like this is the first album where Ghost really kind of found his own solo sound away from the typical Wu-Tang style. I mean, a lot of debut records from respective Wu-Tang members sounded a lot like 36 Chambers. You know, I mean, even Old Dirty Bastard's debut solo record is the return to the 36 Chambers. And on a lot of solo debut ventures from various members in the group, at least post-splitting off from the group anyway, because, you know, members like GZA had music out before he was even in Wu-Tang, or rather, you know, before Wu-Tang came out with 36 Chambers, that is. I'm kind of digressing here, but still. A lot of these post-Wu-Tang, post-36 Chambers, post, you know, Wu World albums had RZA producing on them too. So, of course, he took that same exact production style and just mapped it over onto another artist's solo record. So we're talking about albums that are very similar in aesthetic, style, tone, delivery, and all that. But Ghostface Killah over here with Supreme Clientele, this is a supremely glitzy, glamorous, soulful, heavy, boomy, horn-backed album, like with a lot of great funk and, again, soul samples on this record. It's pretty golden. You know, it's again, very ritzy. And I know I said glitzy, but it's ritzy too. It's a very rich album. With some amazing verses, flows, and refrains from Ghostface. He is just like at the peak of energy and personality on this album. The aura of this record is fantastic, which is why so many artists over the years have sampled from this album. You know, most notably Kanye with, you know, that Cruel Summer stuff and all that. So this is an excellent record. This is an excellent record, back to front. Excellent album. One great beat after the next, one great verse after the next, and again, Ghostface Killah really kind of coming into his own on this record. Also want to shout out Ghostface Killah's Fishscale. This is a later era Wu-Tang album. This record dropped like in the mid-2000s, which by this point, a lot of Wu-Tang members solo were not dropping their best stuff. However, Ghostface Killah miraculously came through with one of his best albums yet. And not only is that because of killer production, some of which was brought to the table by the likes of MF Doom. But also, this record is a bit of a concept album, a bit of a story album, not really reinventing the wheel or anything, because at this point, so many other rappers had already kind of established the whole sound, style, and narrative of rap revolving around drug dealing and organized crime and the whole mafioso thing, and Ghostface is essentially putting his own spin on that here, except his energy level is incredible, his bars are great. There are a lot of different sides and personality changes to the character that he plays on this album. Some of the most interesting of which pop up toward the end of the album. And lots of bangers on here. Some amazing appearances from the likes of Raekwon the Chef. And yeah, again, even though records like Cuban Linx, for example, precede this album in terms of a lot of what it's doing, it's still very well done. It's still incredibly produced, and easily one of Ghostface's best lyrical efforts. So moving on from there, Ghostface Killah, the last Ghostface album in this list, I promise you. I could have thrown 12 Reasons to Die in this list if I really wanted to, but I didn't want to bury you guys in Ghostface records. I also could have mentioned RZA's Grave Diggers, the debut album from Grave Diggers, which is a great hardcore hip-hop and kind of a horrorcore record too. However, I didn't so much count that as a solo effort, but still, I digress. Ghostface Killah, Ironman, his debut record. There are actually some great songs on here, although again, I'll say that of the 3 albums that I just listed, while it's not bad, it's still very much in the same musical and aesthetic and lyrical vein of Wu-Tang's earlier efforts. Of course, Raekwon and Capadonna are on a great deal of the tracks of this album. So it pretty much sounds like a Wu effort in a lot of respects. And again, at this point, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Tracks like Motherless Child show Ghostface Killah has a slightly more emotional side, which is kind of nice. You know, he can be a dynamic guy if he wants to, which has also been one of the things that throughout his career I think has separated him from some of the other members in the group. You know, his knack for storytelling and the fact that he can go with an emotional track or two every once in a while, and it lands like really hard. I think I'm going to leave it at that. This album is full of raw, rugged, hardcore hip-hop, 90s New York bangers. Do not miss out on it. Some great hooks on this thing too. And Raekwon, he contributes nearly as much lyrical greatness to this thing as Ghostface does. So, you know, you can't discount how much he truly added to the album. All right, moving on from there, another record where Raekwon and Ghostface are both very prominently featured. Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Linx. Excellent production on this thing. Again, more boom bap beats, great energy, but generally more of a focus on organized crime and drug dealing throughout this album. This record, in a lot of respects, is credited with helping to kind of just start the ball rolling on that trend in rap music, as very few, if not any albums up until this point, although that's most likely not entirely the case, had kind of focused on this topic with the depth and the attention span that Only Built for Cuban Linx did. I think if anything really truly holds this album back in retrospect, it's that, again, just the sound and the production of the album in general just sounds very much in line with that early Wu style, and everything else other respective Wu-Tang members were dropping around that same time. And it does leave things feeling maybe a little bit uniform, even though this record, again, for the context that it was in, was very groundbreaking. I think maybe if you wanted to get into this one and you are a younger and a more unfamiliar listener, it might make sense to maybe even start with Raekwon's follow-up to Only Built for Cuban Linx, Only Built for Cuban Linx 2. Now, this is not a direct follow-up to that album. Obviously, it's a sequel, but Raekwon dropped quite a few projects since then, and has dropped quite a few projects in general, but unfortunately, he's one of the more inconsistent, shall we say, members of the Wu-Tang Clan when it comes to solo stuff. However, this record over here, I would say, focuses even more lyrically on those elements of organized crime, of drug dealing, and the beats are more eerie and dramatic. Sure, it's not the classic Wu sound that people are used to listening to from Raekwon, but the instrumental choice on this record is great. The storytelling is fantastic too. It's rare that you get a sequel album in hip-hop that is really striving to be as great as the original, and I think Raekwon certainly had that intention in mind, and for the most part, he succeeded on that front. So, you know, respect to him on this record. It's a great album, and give both a shot. Give both a shot. Next record I wanted to mention in this list is GZA's, Genius's Liquid Swords. Again, not GZA's first album that he's ever released, but his first since splitting off to do his own solo thing after Wu-Tang kind of hit it big. Of course, RZA's production is all over this record. And like a lot of other Wu-Tang solo efforts, again, you do have those funk and soul samples. You do have those elements of Asian music, soundtrack stuff from karate movies, that sort of thing popping up in the production, but maybe not to the degree that it does here. I will say, even though there are a lot of lyrical and production similarities between this album and a lot of initial Wu-Tang releases, this record certainly is a bit catchier and a bit eerier than a lot of those albums. Like there's definitely an unsettling tone and demeanor to a lot of the rapping, lyrics, and instrumentals on this record. I would actually say that this album takes a lot of those karate film elements of 36 Chambers and makes them even more dramatic and in your face. In that respect, I think that vision of 36 Chambers originally, like in comparison with this album, it almost feels a little watered down because you had to try to find a way to make that style work with so many different artists, with so many styles and personalities and ideas. On this album over here, this feels like a very focused effort from two key founding members of the Wu-Tang Clan who seem like they're able to indulge in this idea, indulge in this sound in a completely unadulterated fashion. And the results of that are fucking just fireworks in every direction, from the opening track to the closer on here. Again, it's hard hitting, it's nasty, it's cutthroat, it's mean, it's dramatic as hell, it's dark, and again, I'll use the word unsettling. Unfortunately, a lot of other GZA's albums are not really up to snuff. While he hasn't dropped some of the worst material solo in the Wu-Tang Clan, his discography is a little spotty outside of this album, sadly. So this will be the only GZA project that I'll be mentioning in this list. Let's get into the next record. It's the next one over here. Of course, Ol' Dirty Bastard returned to the 36 Chambers, dirty version. So, Ol' Dirty Bastard, quite easily like the most standout voice in the Wu-Tang Clan in terms of his energy level and just the insanity that he brought to his performances. And that is just completely, nothing, absolutely nothing is holding that back on this new album over here. Ol' Dirty Bastard brings tons of, again, personality, tons of energy, great vibe. The instrumentals are quite possibly some of the boomiest, the heaviest, the most hard-hitting of any of the solo initial Wu projects. But I feel like what you're kind of sacrificing for all that stuff, and let's also note that this album is catchy as hell. Like Shimmy Shimmy Ya, Brooklyn Zoo, stuff like that, madly catchy, super infectious. Like O.D.B and RZA definitely had a gift for hooks on this record. But again, all that being said, what you do sacrifice for all those things a little bit is that the lyricism on this album isn't quite as impressive as it is on some of the other Wu-Tang solo efforts. It's not nearly as slick. Sometimes it's not nearly as smart. Really what you're getting with O.D.B is the bombacity, is just that over-the-top delivery and demeanor. And there are a lot of people who kind of, poo-poo this album a little bit, don't see it as respectable as Liquid Swords as a result of that. But honestly, I think that, again, more than one way to skin a cat, and Ol' Dirty Bastard just kind of has his own appeal within the world of the Wu-Tang's music. And I don't necessarily see it as better or worse, especially when it comes to another record that I think is one of the best Wu-Tang solo efforts, and certainly an underrated one, because at the time I think a lot of people didn't quite understand the appeal of the nuttiness, I guess, of O.D.B, is his second full-length album. I'll say Nibba Please is how I'll refer to it. Looking like a total madman on the front cover in this like Rick James style getup. This record is insane. This record is insane, and that's really all I can say about it outside of there's some production here from, Pharrell. The beats are off the wall. He's clearly trying to go poppier on the hook side and on the instrumental side, but his delivery, his rapping are completely unhinged. Like, his singing is horribly off key. He's screaming his brains out. The rapping is just the flows are so weird and so off kilter. It's really kind of like inadvertently like an avant rap album, and freaky in the best way possible. In such a way where, again, at the time, people did not quite get it. It was just seen as like an oddity. It was just seen as like, wow, O.D.B is just like on way too much cocaine. And, that was likely the case. O.D.B probably should have, tried to stay more sober than he in fact was, because it did kind of lead to his demise, unfortunately. However, that madness did also contribute greatly to the appeal of albums like this, and I think the magic of albums like this, because this record really is truly like a unique experience, because you do in a way dive into the cluttered and the warring mind of this one-of-a-kind artist, and I will leave it at that. Moving on from there, I want to shout out Masta Killa's No Said Date. Masta Killa, not one of the more top-tier members of the Wu-Tang Clan, in my opinion, and in most people's opinions, and on top of it, not really an artist that really kind of sped out of the gates when it came time to do solo stuff, as this debut Masta Killa album didn't drop in the 90s like many of the other Wu-Tang Clan solo stuff did. This dropped in the mid-2000s. So it took him about a decade to finally get like this solo effort together, and it's actually not that bad. The production is not nearly as grimy as a lot of other beats are on Wu solo stuff. It kind of does have a clean 2000s era, bling era, style and aesthetic to it. But it doesn't take away from Masta Killa's above average lyricism on this thing. Good energy overall. He definitely kind of updates that Wu-Tang sound and brings it into a new era. And was certainly sounding better than some of his counterparts from the group were in their own respective solo efforts around this same time. So shout out to No Said Date. And the last one I'm going to shout out is Method Man's Tical, which came out in the 90s, not too long after the release of 36 Chambers. Certainly dropped in a time period where it should have been one of those core Wu-Tang solo efforts, but unfortunately it is often overlooked in favor of, a Liquid Swords or a Supreme Clientele or an Ironman or, a Return to the 36 Chambers. And there's good reason for that. There are some kind of ill-conceived songs on here, like that track where he's essentially doing like a weird hip-hop interpolation of I Will Survive, and it's absolutely hideous. I also think Method Man, while this is easily his best solo effort, failed to keep this project interesting from front to back, which is also a head scratcher considering that he's easily one of the most charismatic members of the group when you're talking about core Wu-Tang albums, like albums that included every member of Wu-Tang Clan. But again, because of some of those ill-conceived tracks, because the sound just doesn't really stick out against a lot of those other Wu-Tang solo efforts that dropped in the 90s. I just feel like what's up with this record is that it just merely pales in comparison to an Ironman and a Liquid Swords. And again, a Return to the 36 Chambers. It's not a bad record by any means, but it really, doesn't have the same kind of spark and magic that those other albums do, in my opinion. And that is it. Those are the records that I wanted to recommend to you guys. Best Wu-Tang solo efforts. Make sure you check them out. Give them some time. Give them some space. And, again, apologies to U-God. Apologies to Inspector Deck. They have some decent, efforts under their belts. But I'm just not as crazy about those as I am these over here. And, that's going to be it. I'm going to leave this list down there in the description box so you guys can see what I'm recommending, and thank you for watching. Love you, love you, love you. Anthony Fantano, Wu-Tang, forever.